This Doom Guy Batman would have been one of my favorite McFarlanes if it wasn't for these two flaws. Everyone, just letting you know that all figures found in this review could be found over at bigbadtoystore.com. Links could be found in the description below, and if you guys use them, they help out the channel quite a bit. Doing a little bit of catch up here for the end of the year roundup of DC Multiverse McFarlane Batman figures. I've already covered the Injustice 2 Batman that's part of the Page Punchers wave because I was such in a hurry to see exactly what McFarlane did with that iteration. So it's only fair that I would kind of revert a little backwards to take a look at the Shazam comic version of Batman here from that Page Punchers wave. And you guys know, as I mentioned in that Injustice 2 review, Injustice 2 Batman rather, that I really love the added value they throw in with this Page Punchers wave, because you get a comic book, you get the card, and you get the base, along with whatever accessories they decide to muster with their different take on the characters. And this is this version of Batman, which I had some reservations when I saw some of the promo pictures and I saw the publicity shots. I'm like, that looks very stocky, very militarized. I don't know how to really feel about this iteration of Batman. But god damn, what a 180 I made, considering that this is now one of my favorite interpretations of Batman as far as costume design is concerned. Because there's just something about the militarized, padded look of this Batman that took no amount of time in really warming up to me. And the best way that I can articulate of how I feel about this version or this costume is that it really does look as if McFarlane took Doom Guy from the Doom series and turned him into Batman. That's honestly the best way that I can kind of create an analogy as far as how this Batman looks like, as far as his tenacity, how rugged and visceral he looks like. All he's really missing is that shotgun that Doom Guy uses in the games. And the way that I was able to kind of interpret that is because of all of the different kind of paddings and armorized look to his costume comes across, especially around the torso area. You see an awful lot of the divots and the armor plating going alongside the abdominal area, looking up towards the really cool bat symbol that's honestly one of my favorite bat symbols, not only because it's not even painted on, it's its own separate piece that's kind of embezzled onto the chest piece, but also we get to these shoulder pieces that feel very nicely textured with the matte look, as well as the very cargo-y looking areas around the biceps and the triceps that really sell the image. You even have a very militarized utility belt that looks very tactical, along with a nice looking bat symbol there in the center that's even slightly chrome painted. It's kind of like a mute chrome, but you have an awful lot of good detail and paint decal going alongside the utility belt, and just the overall aesthetic of how this suit looks. I don't know what it is, but I love it. I know it might be leaning more towards the subjective side. I can see some people not gravitating towards this look, but there's just something about it that's really doing it for me. You even have a little bit more of that paint decal that was going on with that bat symbol on the utility belt coming across on the spikes on the gauntlets, and a little bit of the brass knuckles around the gloves. So little details like that is really what's selling the figure for me. And then we get to the cowl, where the short ears are really doing it, and it really complements the sculpting around the face, the whited out eyes, and then of course a little bit of the 5 o'clock shadow along the grimace of his face there. It really sells the look. Definitely looks like a lot meaner of a Batman as far as him kind of working with his cohorts here to take on Shazam. So it looks like one that lives in that world, that much darker, edgier world, especially if it's going to be a Batman that's going to be teaming up with the likes of Constantine. So having the much more muted look, especially since if you look a little closer, and hopefully it comes across well on camera, this is not even gray. This is more like a muted, very ugly green, but it somehow again fits into the militarized look of this specific Batman. And it ultimately makes me feel kind of bad that I slept on this figure for quite a few months now. I understand that this review is a little bit on the late side, but like I always like to say, better late than never, and frankly, this is definitely a figure that's doing an awful lot of great design choices for me, save for two particular ones that definitely slapped me in the face upon pulling him out of the plastic. Two of them are right here staring at me right in the face because it's very difficult to not ignore them, and that's the thighs. Look at these massive chonkers. I mean, it's DC Rebirth Batman all over again, in the sense that put two of them together and they're pretty much thicker than his torso even is as far as body proportions. Everything to me looked alright except for these thighs, and from any angle that I look at them, they really are swollen in a way that just doesn't look all that right. And that's saying quite an awful lot, considering that if you navigate downwards, you'll notice that towards the calf and shin area, he's a little bow-legged, but he's not the worst culprit out of the DC Multiverse line. There's other McFarlane figures that I've covered in the past that have much more bow-legged angles as far as the sculpting of his legs that aren't too intrusive here. It's more so those thighs that, to me, just kind of ruin the proportions and the illusions of this figure as far as the legs are concerned. I'm almost even confident to say that's more of an objective take, that McFarlane really needs to pull back a little bit, because that's already 2, maybe 3 figures this year alone that would have made at least much more significant impact on my collection as far as Batman McFarlane figures are concerned if it wasn't for these disproportionate thighs. The diaper's not even a problem here because it looks very flush with the rest of the body, but it's those thighs that just look objectively weird, and I'm pretty certain I'm not the only one that is saying so. Leaning more towards the subjective side of things that, again, doesn't really do it for me as far as this figure that comes close at being one of my favorites is the cape. The texturing is actually not too bad, especially when we look at the cape from the shoulder area, but as we navigate downwards and it spreads its white span here, there's something about the way they sculpted the creasing that is just kind of weird. It just doesn't feel great in hand, and it doesn't even look that great in person, especially on this side here towards his right, where we have some creasing kind of bending inwards. It looks like it's trying to do the in the wind kind of pose, like it's blowing in the wind, but at the same time kind of not. It just looks ugly and creased off, almost as if it was defective, and I don't know if maybe it is. I'm gonna have to look at some pictures and videos of other people's figures for this guy, but in person, it just doesn't look all that great, and there's very little malleability and maneuverability with the cape itself that is just easily not necessarily one of my favorites. So the cape combined with the thighs, it's really what's killing the design for me, that ultimately would have been to one of the underdog interpretations of Batman as far as the design is concerned. Now, moving on to articulation, it's actually not too bad in the long stretch of things. Of course, the head is going to be able to rotate 360 degrees as well as tilt slightly up and down and even left to right. Arms are able to move all the way upwards like so and can slightly glide amongst the side of the cape here to be able to rotate the full 360. Unfortunately, this is probably the most limiting of the arm extensions I've had on a Batman McFarlane because of the way that these shoulder pads are not only molded but also glued onto the side of the shoulder here. You're gonna have some problems with proper extensions. So the only workaround is to be able to kind of squeeze and slide in the padding into the back side of the cape here. On the inside portion where the cape and the shoulder really meet, you're gonna have to slide it in there if you want any kind of extension. So it's slightly doable, but it's only gonna be in the way that the arm is positioned in this manner, where the pegs of the pins of the biceps here are facing forwards. So they're going to be exposed, as well as a little slot right here where you can see the joint moving inwards and outwards. But in terms of just standard lateral extension like other McFarlanes are able to do, it's actually kind of out of the window because of the way that these shoulder pieces are sculpted in place. So do be careful with that, otherwise you're going to have these things coming off if you are forcing it too badly. Similarly, you also have bicep swivels that can rotate, but they're going to be rather snug and potentially endangering to the shoulder piece because of it being there. So the actual bicep piece is going to come in the way. Do be careful with that. So a little limiting on the shoulder and arm articulation, but thankfully you do have the two joints at the elbows that are fully able to bend all the way upwards, as well as ball joints on the wrist that are properly able to rotate the hand as well as pivot inwards and outwards. And while we're on the subject of limitations, you do have a mid-torso cut in the middle that's blended really well because of the way that all this abdominal area is padded out by the armor, but it's only really able to slightly edge left and right. It's almost kind of frozen in place. But the thing is that it can extend towards the back. You can see a little bit of a dividend right there in the middle. Doesn't really do much in the form of crunching from either side, from either left to right. So it's pretty stagnant unless that's an isolated incident with my figure. If you guys own this guy, let me know in the comments if by some chance you have been able to get that mid-torso cut to crunch in any direction, because mine cannot, and neither can it really properly rotate. The only real rotation you'll get is actually out of the waist. The waist is able to horizontally move all the way around 360 degrees. So that's really about it for the torso articulation. It's kind of stuck a little bit in place, and you can kind of nudge it a little left to right, but that's mostly being done by the waist above the utility belt. So that's just something to note right there. The legs are able to lift about that far. They become a little stagnant and limited once you get to the top area because of the diaper. Even though it's not that big, it's still doing a feasible job of being able to snug it in place right about right there, and slightly towards the backside, only about that far. And you do get a decent amount of extension off to the sides. Considering how bulgy those thighs are, they are able to flush and lift all the way upwards like so. Both knees are able to fully bend at the two joints right about right there. And then when we get down to the ankles, for a minute I thought it was just the typical ball joints, but upon closer inspection, maybe it's because of how bulky the design of the boots themselves are, but they're actually those joints that I really like. So you're able to somewhat pivot them downwards as well as upwards, slightly like so via a ratcheted joint, but they are fully able to rotate at 2 points in those joints and slightly pivot them inwards and outwards amongst the ankle like that. And of course you do get the toesies, though because of the way that the bulky boots are designed, they're a little bit on the, I don't want to say limited side, but just small, to where the toes almost become kind of superfluous. Posing him and being able to put him in a particular stance is going to be a little bit of a challenge because of the way that the articulation is somewhat limited. And it's a shame because he looks really cool, especially if you put him in a stance like this. Look at that. I mean, this design really warmed up to me, and it makes me pretty sad to see that the articulation is a little bit on the stagnated side combined with the cape and thighs. But as you'll notice right there, his right hand, his right hand is actually shaped to look like it's holding something. And that's because aside from the aforementioned comic book base and card that's thrown in with all of the Page Puncher wave figures from McFarlane Toys, they also threw in an extra accessory. Of course, you can never miss, almost literally, with Batman's Batarang right there, which is somewhat modeled after, to me it looks more like the Injustice 2 Batarang, but I don't know, maybe that's just me. It kind of resembles a little bit of the one from his chest symbol, but that one's a little bit more on the angled side with the wingspan, and still, it looks pretty cool. So to have it be placed in the hand is relatively easy. You just gotta fit one of the wings right there like you typically do with almost any Batarang. And as you can see, there you have the Page Puncher's Batman from the Shazam comic book wave. And yeah, I still have some regret of not covering this guy a little bit sooner, but he comes with enough caveats that made me go, damn it, like we were just almost there of possibly getting ourselves one of our contenders for the top 5 McFarlane Batmans. But my distaste for that cape, as well as the objectively huge thighs that kind of throw off the disproportions and the illusions of the figure itself, keep it at bay from reaching those heights. But it's a shame because I really do have to give credit to the actual design and whoever came up with this design for Batman, because though I was a little trepidatious at first, it warmed up to me in no time whatsoever to become a really badass looking Batman that really does look like if Doom Guy were to be Batman, this is probably the suit that he would choose to take on Gotham City. So I will definitely be giving the Page Puncher's Shazam comic book Batman a generous 8 out of 10. It's just on the cusp of being a 9, but again, it's those little issues that I have with the figure that keep it from being able to achieve that. Nevertheless, it's still a recommendable figure from me, and if you guys want to pick him up, he is available over at Big Bad Toy Store. There's going to be a link in the description if you guys want to check that out, and it does help out the channel in the process. Now I want you guys to go into the comment section and let me know, is there a specific, very obscure and niche comic book arc of your favorite superhero that you would want to see a figure be made into the Page Punchers line, meaning they get their own comic book, base, card, accessory, all the works for the $24.99 that I personally believe is worth it for some of those figures. In fact, even though I'm not a Superman guy, I'm tempted to pick up the Superman that comes in this specific wave because I actually kind of like his look, the little darker, grittier look, and he would be a very nice complementary figure here, a companion piece if you will, with Batman. Let me know your guys' entries in the comment section below. Of course, as always, if you guys enjoyed this review, hit the thumbs up button. If you didn't, hit the thumbs down, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Until then, stay humble and take care.